We've got a significant update regarding the ongoing legal efforts to remove suppressors and short-barreled rifles from the National Firearms Act across the country. Let's take a closer look at what's been happening recently and why it matters. If you've been following the developments, you're likely familiar with the passage of H.R. 1, commonly referred to as the Big Bill, which is now officially signed into law. While this legislation did not include the full versions of the Hearing Protection Act or the Short Act that many supporters of the Second Amendment had hoped for, it did result in a major change: the elimination of the $200 tax for certain items regulated under the NFA. Under the new law, starting next year, the $200 tax typically required for items such as suppressors and short-barreled rifles will be reduced to zero. That's a huge shift. However, it's important to note that the rest of the NFA regulations were left untouched. Unfortunately, many in Congress, particularly some Republicans who were expected to push harder, did not fight to have the full language of the Short Act and Hearing Protection Act included in the bill. These lawmakers also declined to challenge the Senate parliamentarian, whose role was instrumental in removing those provisions from the final version of the bill. What's more, as expected, there's been pushback. Senator Chris Murphy has already introduced a countermeasure, a new bill that would raise the NFA tax, not reduce it. If passed, this proposal would increase the tax stamp from the current $200 to $4,790 per item. This is a clear attempt to respond to the rollback of the NFA tax and to discourage ownership of these items. However, pro-Second Amendment groups are not standing by quietly. Several major organizations have now launched legal challenges aimed at removing suppressors and short-barreled rifles from the NFA entirely. Groups involved in this fight include Gun Owners of America, the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition, Palmetto State Armory, and Silencer Shop. They've filed a lawsuit against the ATF in the Northern District of Texas, arguing that these items should no longer fall under NFA regulation. But that's not the only lawsuit in motion. A separate, coordinated legal action has been filed in the Eastern District of Missouri. This one involves the Firearms Policy Coalition, the Second Amendment Foundation, the National Rifle Association, and the American Suppressor Association. Together, they're challenging the ATF under the jurisdiction of the 10th Circuit. In this new lawsuit, the plaintiffs are directly challenging the validity of the National Firearms Act in light of recent changes, specifically the fact that the tax on certain firearms has effectively been set to zero. They are asking the court to declare that the NFA's regulations, particularly those concerning short-barreled shotguns and suppressors, exceed Congress's constitutional authority under its taxing power. More precisely, they want the court to rule that the NFA's registration and transfer requirements are unconstitutional, both on their face and as applied to these specific types of firearms. Alongside that, they are asking the court to issue an injunction against the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, barring the agency and its agents from enforcing any NFA provisions related to these untaxed firearms. In summary, the Second Amendment Foundation, along with other organizations involved in this case, is requesting the court to declare that the NFA's structure, at least as it applies to these firearms now carrying a $0 tax, goes beyond the powers granted to Congress. They also want the court to halt the ATF and its personnel from carrying out any enforcement actions tied to the NFA on this matter. This lawsuit was filed in the Eastern District of Missouri, a federal court that falls under the 8th Circuit, not the 10th Circuit as initially mentioned. The 8th Circuit has shown a generally fair approach to Second Amendment issues. While not perfect, it has made several rulings that lean in favor of protecting constitutional gun rights. The filing in Missouri now complements an existing NFA challenge already underway in the 5th Circuit. Together, these two cases represent a coordinated legal strategy, challenging the NFA from multiple judicial fronts, increasing the chance of a favorable ruling or, at the very least, forcing the courts to directly address the NFA's constitutionality. However, there's still uncertainty about how the federal government will respond to this lawsuit, especially under the Trump administration. There's speculation that the Trump-era Department of Justice might support the view that the $0 tax undermines the constitutional foundation of the NFA. If they do, this case could potentially see a faster resolution in favor of gun rights advocates. But nothing is guaranteed. In a recent suppressor-related case, the Peterson Challenge, the government filed a brief defending the NFA's structure, asserting that it does not violate the Second Amendment. At the same time, they also acknowledged that states cannot impose outright bans on NFA-regulated items. That contradiction shows there's still some flexibility, or even division, within the government's legal stance. So, while this new challenge presents a promising development, especially for those pushing back against NFA restrictions, we'll have to wait and see how the Department of Justice chooses to engage with this case. Their response could heavily influence the outcome. There's a lot happening right now surrounding the National Firearms Act, NFA. On one hand, lawsuits are actively being filed. On the other, Democratic lawmakers are introducing bills aimed at increasing the NFA tax. But despite the chaos, this overall direction represents positive movement, progress toward challenging an outdated and arguably unconstitutional system. Currently, we have multiple legal challenges filed across various federal jurisdictions. These lawsuits directly contest the constitutionality of the NFA, especially as it relates to suppressors and short-barreled shotguns. The central argument is that, following the recent change reducing the NFA tax to zero, Congress no longer has the authority to regulate these items under its taxing power or any other constitutionally granted power. The plaintiffs argue that without a valid taxing structure, the NFA simply cannot be enforced in its current form. These cases were filed in response to what was passed in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and they are now making their way through the courts. We'll be watching closely to see how they progress. It's very likely that at least some of these cases will eventually reach the federal appellate courts, and possibly even the Supreme Court. It's also worth noting that the Supreme Court already has other NFA-related cases before it, particularly involving short-barreled rifles, and has recently requested a response from the Trump Department of Justice in one of those matters. That development suggests the court is at least somewhat engaged with these issues, which could influence the outcome of these new challenges as well. So that's where things currently stand. As new updates come in, I'll be sure to keep you informed with clear and accurate information. If you've made it this far into the video, that tells me you care about your rights, the Constitution, and staying informed on the issues that truly matter, especially when it comes to the Second Amendment and government overreach. What's happening right now with the National Firearms Act, the lawsuits challenging its legitimacy, and the growing attention from the courts, including the Supreme Court, are not just headlines. These developments could reshape the landscape of firearm regulation in America for generations. So if you value honest reporting, legal updates that actually affect your rights, and breakdowns of cases that the media won't touch, then this is the place for you. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. These cases are moving fast, and we're going to continue tracking every development as it unfolds. I'll break it all down in plain language and keep you ahead of the curve, not just reacting to the news, but understanding the deeper implications. And if you found this video helpful, insightful, or even just thought-provoking, hit the like button, leave a comment below to share your thoughts or questions, and feel free to share this video with others who need to be part of this conversation. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never stop standing up for your rights.